Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm going to make one ask, which is if it's easy for you, turn on your videos so that we can all feel like we are part of a community and we can see each other's faces. All right. There's a lot of content, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So hopefully we can still have time for Q&A. All right. So today I'm going to talk about what I call the career Odyssey. And in a little bit, I'll get to, what that is and why that matters. But I first actually wanted to start with this, which is a lot of you are PMs. You think a lot about your product. You think about what does success look like for your product. You think about working backwards. What does that mean for what you need to hit in terms of your milestones? And I feel like a lot of people actually don't spend the time even thinking about their careers. They're very micro focused, meaning like, okay, what I need to do today, or maybe this quarter, or for my next promo cycle. But my big challenge and my big push is treat your career as your most important product. And so what does that actually mean? Just like for a product, you would have a North Star or a very clear sense of success metrics. I think it's very rare that any of you would work on anything and not be asked by your manager or by the organization to define success. And so I think the first push is like really define success for yourself. And the reality is like success means very different things for very different people. I'm a big believer of if you understand what motivates you, what gives you energy, work is not going to feel like work. And when you find that feeling, you're going to be able to accelerate. So that will be a big part in the career Odyssey. But the first point is really just like understanding yourself and what it is that you're looking for, what gives you energy, what are you, what would you say like, wow, I am in my zone of genius. I feel so great. Then you have to actually be able to quantify that, right? Like being able to say, hey, this is, what I generally like to be doing. Write that down and actually be able to say, this looks like, in my day, I'm spending so much of my time doing X, I'm surrounded by these types of people. I'm working on this kind of problem. Really write that down and then work backwards. What are the big gaps between what you are doing today in terms of your day-to-day, in terms of the people you're surrounded by, in terms of the product you work on, all of these things. And this, I have not said the word title in any of the things I've just said, because that to me is like the very last thing. Write down what those things are for you in terms of what you're working on, what gives you energy, how do you spend your day, and the kind of impact that you're having. Part of it is going to be title, but title is not the most important thing. I'll get to that in a second. And then lastly, like if you're working backwards, what does that mean in terms of what are you going to do this month? Hey, I would like to make progress on one of these dimensions. This is, again, like a product. You're not going to ship all of the features all at once. You're going to say, I'm going to ship this one piece, and this is what success looks like for this one piece. And so really working backwards and treating your career like a product is a big push that we would actually go through as part of the course, but also just generally how I think about your career. So this actually is a live resource, live to anyone right now. So if you go into the Figma community and you look for Career Odyssey and Reflection, you can get access to this. And this is essentially an exercise that I've done at a few times in my life, few pivotal times, and I keep going back to it. So, like it's a constant thing I look at. And really what the Career Odyssey is it helps you map out your next 5 years. It asks you to really say, if I were to continue on the path I am today, what does the next 5 years look like for me? And then it challenges you to get rid of that status quo thinking. What if I were free of constraints? What if I were free of financial constraints? What would I do? What if I were free of, the constraint that I'm only going to be at my current company? Where would I work? It frees you of constraints, and then it asks you to map out your next 5 years from there. And it also asks you to really think about like, how happy are you truly? Is it something that you're going to get energy out of day to day? Does it feel like, there's coherence in your day-to-day versus like, oh, I do this in my day job, but then I like turn off and then I do the thing I really like at my night job. That's not something you want. Again, going back to like, you want to get up every day, punching the air, doing things that you really enjoy. This is what the Career Odyssey really helps you do. So again, I'm not going to have anyone do it now. It takes a very long time. It takes some reflection, but I'll just give you an anecdote from my personal life of how I use this. I did this 2 times. The first time was when I was at Airbnb, and I was enjoying the product I was working on, but I was very frustrated with the bureaucracy. And I was like, what is it? Like, am I happy? Is this what I want to be doing? Like, is this enough to just be at Airbnb? What is it that I want to do? And so I did the Career Odyssey, and I realized that I was most invigorated when, one, I had to work on a product I care about. That's really important to me. So when I worked on Airbnb, I worked on the host side, but I did not want to be somewhere where it felt like there was more energy spent inside the building trying to get things done versus like just let's make a decision, let's drive impact. And so that ultimately helped me realize that what I really wanted was a head of product role, where I would be able to move at the speed that I really wanted to push the team on, as opposed to the speed that the organization was dictating. And so with that, I like that clarity helped me say, okay, like if I want to head a product role, but again, the backstop is I have to be at a place where I care about it. I can't be working on just a technology that I'm just like, oh, this is like not that interesting. It's just helping this one salesperson get better. It had to be something like that I cared about. That is how I ultimately decided to look for head of product roles. And then, and we'll talk more about, again, how do you think about like, is it just title or is it title, but also the growth of company? Ultimately, at that point, I had gotten a few head of product roles, but I didn't feel enough conviction that these companies were going to grow at the rate that I wanted them to grow at. And so I decided not to go there. The other time I used a career Odyssey was when I was leaving WeWork. And I was like, again, I'm going back to my roots of wanting to be a head of product somewhere, but what company, what kind of place would help me thrive? And when I did the career Odyssey, I realized again, like I didn't want to be at somewhere where the thing was just like a little feature. I wanted to be somewhere where I could really create a community and ecosystem. And when I talked to Webflow and all of the companies, all the people in the world who are using Webflow, I realized, hey, these people are making a livelihood using Webflow. Like that gets at the community aspect that I really deeply care about. And so like that is something that I can get up every single day and be really excited about. So it means that I could do my best work. So I really highly encourage all of you to actually just use this resource and do the Career Odyssey reflection, because I think a lot of these things will actually come to light for you. All right, again, I know we're time to time, so I'm going to keep going. The other thing I think is really important is when people do the Career Odyssey, they realize that what they're doing and who they're working with matters more than their title. They also realize that comp matters, definitely matters, but it matters up to a certain point. And I think for every single person, that point is very different. And lastly, the reason why you do two versions of it, which is like, what is your status quo versus what is your future if you could free yourself of constraints, is if you were to dream big, what would that look like? That's essentially when you do, like, again, when you work with designers, you diverge and then you converge. It's that. If you were to diverge, what does your life look like? And that gives you a lot of data points, a lot of information to help you converge better. So the other thing that I believe deeply in is knowing not just what to optimize for in your next role, but in your several roles. And this is this concept of like knowing what is in your skip role, the role after that. And again, it's impossible to know what that is if you do not know what your North Star is, which is the whole point of like treating your career like a product. And so what I really believe in is that if you were to pick, if you had to choose the factors to optimize for, I would optimize for company growth above all else. I think that's actually really, really important. The network is also really important because early in your career, that network is going to compound. If you get a really great network, those people are going to leave and they're going to go start their own companies. They're going to go to other companies where they're going to refer you, and then you're going to have more and more opportunities. So that network compounds and is incredibly important. And then it starts to shift. When you become later in your career, it's about taking all that network, all that company growth, all those learnings, and really driving towards impact. And so also thinking about like, when do you make that shift is something that is not the same for everyone, and also really key. And so I think that the key takeaway, something that is a little bit contrarian, is, a lot of people think that they should optimize for what's on, the left side of the screen, which essentially, let me optimize for comp, let me optimize for title, let me optimize for scope. I don't actually believe in optimizing for any of those things. And instead, I would optimize for company growth over comp. Here's why. Because usually, based on the way things are structured, your equity is going to be more valuable than even the cash comp. So if your company grows and a crazy rate, that is going to make way more of a difference to your overall comp than just your salary. Success of a company is much more important than title, because you could be, literally the CPO of a 5-person company. And if that company doesn't become successful, it doesn't matter. If you go search for another job again, you're going to go back to looking for a PM role. And then finally, scope. This one I think is most unusual for people to wrap their heads around. They're like, of course, scope is really important. But the reality is, if you're actually at a fast-growing company, your scope is going to change. So that the growth of the company is more important than the scope that you get on day one. And then finally, I just want to zoom out and then make time for questions really quickly. But In the course that I do teach, we actually go through all of these things together. So we start off thinking about, how do you truly, again, I gave like a 30-second overview. How do you truly treat your career like your most important product? I think it's also really important to really know what good means. I think it's really difficult to get promoted, to get the next thing that you want when you're not good. At the end of the day, good work speaks for itself. And so how do you be the best product leader that you can be? What does good mean? And I think that, there are many, many frameworks out there, but I really boil it down to something very, very simple. And then this idea of like manifesting your own luck. There are so many ways if you're just like, look, I believe this and I'm going to put myself out there and I'm just going to try this. It's a little bit weird. I'm going to go ask for that role. I'm going to go ask for that opportunity. I think people are actually surprised by the number of times they like get it. We'll talk about how do you optimize for not just your current role or even your next one role, but your next several roles. We'll talk about how you identify the top companies that you actually want to work for. So to the point of like optimizing for high growth, how do you go find those high growth companies? And then like very, very tactical details. There's a lot of content that we don't even talk about live, but that's just a resource for you to really go through interview questions, interview tips, negotiation tips. And then lastly, I think this is a thing where like this idea of like managing a career, it's not just when you're looking for a new job or thinking about moving companies or moving teams. It's a continuous thing. How do you actually advocate for yourself on a continuous basis? How do you put together your own development plan? Make it easy for your manager to give you the opportunity, right? Like you don't want to be like, promote me, but instead you want to be like, here's the problem that I see, and I put together a plan. But by the way, that plan is one where our incentives are mutually aligned. And then specifically when it comes to that promo cycle, how do you actually make a case for yourself in a way that's tasteful and again, does what I just mentioned, but is still you champion your own career? And so with that, I just want to say, I'd love for folks to join us. This is a course that we do, a few times a year, but the next cohort is on the 22nd, and we have a few slots open. So we'd love for folks to, if this is interesting, want to go deeper, to enroll and join us. It's a very intimate setting. We cap it at 50 people. And so you get a lot of this, but much richer and a lot of hands-on time. So with that, I try to blaze through it. I told Eleanor and Alina I'd do all the content in under 15 minutes. And so I'd love to take Q&A for the rest of the time.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jay-Z. We already are having some really great questions in the Q&A tool. The most upvoted one right now is from Laura. When you think about your career development goals, particularly something like a skip role, how do you research and narrow down what you're looking for? Product can go in so many directions unless you have an area of clear specialization.
This is really interesting. I think there's a lot of parts to that question. So I'm going to try to break it apart a little bit. The first one is this idea of like specialization or not. I have personally built a career out of being a generalist. I worked in gaming, then I went to Dropbox and I worked literally on their APIs and developer ecosystem, partly because I had imposter syndrome. And I was just like, I don't even know what an API is or stands for. If I could really understand that, like, I feel like I could just go a lot further. I worked on, collaboration productivity tools, 0 to 1 products at Dropbox. I was kind of like prototyping. And again, hosting at Airbnb, I literally did growth to mobile, to community, to city compliance, to ML categorization. Like I have personally felt that the power of being a generalist is really important. But I think everyone is different. I think this goes back to, again, the career odyssey and like what gives you energy. What gives me energy is to be able to go really, really broad across a lot of things. And if I know that about myself, like I don't like going super, super deep. I go deep when it comes to like, if this is a problem, I need to figure out what's going on, but I don't get energy from being like, I just want to work on, like machine learning for the rest of my career. Like that's not who I am. I get energy out of being like, oh, I understand this to this degree and this to this degree, and I could put all these pieces together and really be able to see the pattern here or be able to see something that other people can't. And so knowing that about myself has helped me be like, okay, that's what I enjoy. And so as a result, like I'm going to close off the option space of the world that is essentially like, I'm going to build expertise in a very, very specific thing. Again, I love marketplaces, but if you ask me to work on marketplaces for the rest of my life, I'd be really bored. But I love the fact that I can take what I've learned about marketplaces and go to, a B2B company and be like, oh, interesting. Have you thought about the power of the marketplace on top of this tool? Because essentially you can then connect people. Like that's the kind of thing I like doing. And I think knowing that about yourself is really, really important. So I think the first, I know this is a slightly different way of answering the question, but like the first thing is just knowing what gives you energy for you to say, like, I am going to go deep. And if you are going to go deep, then yes, you should definitely specialize. You should go deeper and deeper and figure out where that particular domain is going. If what gives you energy is to work in a specific vertical like healthcare, go really like have a point of view. There's always like know where it's going, work backwards. Know where it's like that is constant like product advice I give to everyone. So if you're like I love healthcare, where's healthcare going? Like healthcare is really broad. What slice of healthcare do you have a point of view on? Is it the power of aging, the science of aging, like, and what people want to do for that? That's very different than literally like regulatory healthcare tech, right? Like completely different. You would build a very different skill set. You go after very different opportunities. So I think the first thing is like, are you a generalist? If you're not, are you into a vertical? If you're not into a vertical, are you into like a particular function? Like, again, you're like, I just love the data work, really interesting to me. When you find that for yourself, and again, I think the Career Odyssey really helps you crystallize that and verbalize that in a way that it's sometimes difficult when people think about this stuff. They don't want to close off option spaces. They're like, oh, I want that and I want that and I want that. And it's like, I get it. Like, it's nice to dream that you want all the things, but if you really dug deep and you had to pick which one of the ones is most important to you, and that's going to give you a really big push into like the way you want to go. So one, the specialization is not necessarily true for everyone, but true for some people, and it results in very different paths. And then finally, just thinking about like the next few roles, it's all about this working backwards concept. If you know you're going to go really, really deep and you want to go deep in a vertical, I would do roles that help you have those connections with that vertical. That's more important than just building your skill set. If you're like, I really want to be a generalist, I'll give you a story from my own career. When I went to WeWork, I literally worked on infrastructure. And the reason I did that was because I was like, I have been at companies over and over again where the fight between the infrastructure teams and the user-facing teams is huge. And so if I'm going to be a really amazing head of product, I have to go work on something that I totally don't understand so that I'm not just going to be biased towards, hey, let's ship as quickly as we can, as many features as we can. And so I went to WeWork specifically to be like, hey, I know this company is growing like gangbusters. In fact, it's growing way too fast for its own good. But if I were to be the infrastructure layer for a company that's growing that rapidly, what does that look like? What are the trade-offs? What are the hard calls that I have to make? And so I specifically went in knowing that that was the thing I wanted to learn, because again, going back to my personal goals, I believe in the power of being a generalist. And it was really, really important for me to do all of those pieces.
Thank you so much, JC. We have another question that got upvoted most, which is, how do you find high growth companies? What factors do you actually look for?
Yeah, that's a great question. We'll go a lot deeper in the course, but at the highest level, I think there are a couple of things that there are a couple of obvious things, meaning like, the obvious things are going to be like, how quickly is that company's revenue growing? That being said, those are very difficult to sniff out from the outside. And so I think one of the best things to look for is actually talent density. That's very, very easy to look at from the outside. And so if you're one trick I would do is like, hey, I've gone through my life. I've, gone to school. I've worked at certain companies. At every single location that I've been at, and literally it could even be high school for some people, where have the best people gone? And sure, some of them are lawyers and doctors, but wherever relevant, you're like, oh, interesting. I worked with people and they were the best that I worked with. And this is where they've gone. What do they see in those places? And a lot of times there's this idea of like talent density, where like when someone actually has asymmetric information, because the reality is like we all don't have the information that every single person does, they will go somewhere and they'll be like, hey, by the way, did you know that this is how this company is doing? This is what's interesting. Other really great people will follow them. And so when you start to see like the opposite of an exodus, a migration towards certain places, and you're like, why is that leader there? Why is that leader there? Oh, interesting. What's going on there? That's actually a really, really good sign that there's something really special. And that makes it so you're not just looking at the companies that are like past their prime, meaning, oh, all the people have already gone there, and now you're like many, many steps, many rounds potentially behind where people have already flocked. I'm going to end it there because there's so many ways to answer that question, but I think that is maybe like a unique insight that all of you guys can take and use.
Thank you. The next most upvoted question is one about transition. I've often heard that it's impossible to move to a product role for the first time in a different vertical. To what extent is it a good idea to compromise on your ideal role just to break into product coming from an engineering background?
Ah, yes. Um, so again, there's, I think, so many aspects to that question. The first thing I would say is I do think, to my framework earlier, company growth, it's more important than title. So if you're like, I just think this company is going to grow and you have deep belief in yourself, especially if you're in engineering, I think moving from product design or engineering into the product role, maybe sometimes data science, those are some of the easiest ways to do it because you're usually working with people who can advocate for your work, and you can show up and you can be like, look, I'm an engineer, but like I'm thinking like a product manager. And that's very, very powerful. And so if you are an engineer, so specifically to the person asking this question, if you're an engineer and you want to go work at a different company, different vertical, I would look for the fastest growing company in the vertical that you're at. I wouldn't care so much about the title. I'd actually go in as an engineer because engineers are highly paid, highly in demand. And then I think you would be able to transition into that quite quickly. And the only thing the additional advice I'd give you is I think you should ask in your interview process to meet with more people than just in your chain. I would ask to meet with the PM leader. And again, usually when they're trying to recruit you, they're like, sure, you can meet with a CPO, you can meet with a VP of product, whoever, you can meet with the director of this area. And I think you can be very clear with that person. These are my career ambitions. And I promise you, very few product leaders, when they have an engineer that everyone wants to say yes to and hire, would they be like, oh, this person wants to be a PM? And so they might be like, by the way, everyone, just so you know, like, I don't know, like this person ultimately has career ambitions to be a PM, but like, I promise you that like product leader will be very tickled by that fact, because product leaders love people who, like, I would always take an engineer or a designer over someone for business school. And again, that the whole business school thing could be another conversation where, like, if you're deciding, should I do business school? Should I not? I think if you want it for the experience, go for it. But it is literally 2 years of lost time where you're not going to be actually working. So you go to business school if you're like, I will get a crazy network from that business school, and that business school is known for their network. But otherwise, you should actually go to a company where that's going to give you a crazier, even better network. And so again, as an engineer, you should totally take the fast growing company with some tips on how to like set expectations over the fact that you just need to get a PM title somewhere.
Thank you, JC. Related to this, a lot of upvotes for what are some resources available for individuals transitioning? Oh, sorry, too many questions coming in. What are some resources available for individuals transitioning into a product role without a traditional product background?
Yeah. Well, I'm also teaching product management foundations in May. So would love to have you join, both if folks are interested, but that in particular goes really deep into what does it mean to be a good PM. And I think that like it is truly what I wish I had known as a first-time PM that I just had to learn through trial and error. So I think that's also a really great resource.
Perfect. And then one about your work experience. You mentioned you joined WeWork to work on infrastructure, but didn't have much experience in that domain before then. Without domain experience, how did you convince the hiring manager that you could succeed in that role? And did you face any challenges?
Yeah. Um, I believe that the most important thing for that team was to be able to talk to their customers, and they weren't. And so if you're actually building infrastructure for a rapidly growing organization, the most important thing is to understand where's the organization going and what do they need. It's not just to be like, oh, therefore you do Kubernetes and then you do, CI/CD and blah, blah, blah. Like that's not the point. The point is to be like, what of our precious resources do we actually put people on? And so that was the angle that I had going into that conversation, which is like, this is what I think your problem actually is. If they didn't believe me, then I wouldn't have gotten the role. If they were like, oh, they were like, that's a really good point. And I actually want someone who can complement the rest of the leadership team, which were all very seasoned engineering execs. Like they were like, I want a product person who is going to be, essentially going to push all these really seasoned engineering execs to go do their best work. And that's why I got that role.
We have a couple minutes left, so we'll probably pick the last few. The next one is from Kyle. Joining a high growth company sounds great, but doing so without the benefit of retrospect seems tough. Any year, a previously high growth company can flatten out, even resulting in a down round. How do you successfully pick companies that are really going to 10x again?
Yeah, I mean, that is truly the $1 million question. I think it's hard. I think it's really hard. Well, one thing, we are past the phase where valuations were crazy and inflated. So that in itself is a blessing versus if we were to do this course 3 years ago, I think, yeah, it's hard. Like you could see companies that are like this much in ARR and their multiple is 100 and you're like, I don't understand. So that doesn't happen anymore. Most companies have truly marked down their valuations. And I think that's also a sign. If you're like, I don't see this company marking it down, or some don't need to because they have grown. Like they've truly grown into their valuation or are going to be growing into their valuation. So I think you literally have to be like, okay, what is your revenue? And this is like further down, right? Like, again, I told you like the shortcut to figure out where to start interviewing. But once you're deep in the interviews, yes, you have to make that evaluation and decide for yourself what's going to happen to this company. That comes down to what's the growth rate, what's the rev, like, but also I think it's not just that. Like, I think that at the end of the day, there's no easy money. You have to have the judgment. And sometimes your judgment is right and sometimes your judgment is wrong. And so I think there are times when you're like, I see something in this company. I see that if this company were to execute on this strategy or with AI, this company can actually transform itself in a very meaningful way. If you actually have that belief, then you should go there and you should make that a reality. And if it comes to career defining things, I'm a believer of like, sure, you can get on rocket ships and you should. If there's a rocket ship, hop on that rocket ship. But if you're truly like, I don't know if there's a rocket ship right now, then find the things that you feel like you can inflect in a very specific way. And that is career defining because you can be like, hey, I came into this company. The company was doing X and I got this company to be doing Y. And that was meaningful and really different for that company. Like that is going to create for you a reputation of being able to go in, turn a company around, or even just like inflect a company. And everyone wants that. People don't want people who are just like, oh, I just sat on this rocket ship for 5 years, right? So I think like the reality is the times are the times, but I do think you can actually be really thoughtful about, hey, where can I go and do something really unique for that company? And when you have conviction in those opportunities, you should go for it.
Thanks, Jay-Z. We have 2 minutes. I want to squeeze in one last question. The last most upvoted is from Helly. Her question is, looking at your career journey, Jay-Z, you've managed to grow quite fast. How did you manage that? What were the main challenges, and what was unexpectedly easy?
Oh, wow, there's like so many parts of that question in 1 minute. I think that if you treat your career like a product and you really know what it is that not title, but like what it is that motivates you. And I'll be very transparent. What motivates me is having like, I know everyone says having an impact. So I'm not going to say that, but what motivates me is having the ability to inflect a company. That's what, like when I did my career Odyssey, I was like, that is really important to me. You can also call it like in unflattering words. You can be like control or whatever it is, right? Like again, the more unflattering it is, the more honest you are with yourself. So like do not stop at impact. Impact is just the first level. So if I really want control, then like that was really critical for me to understand that about myself, to be able to say like, oh, I would like to go to places that look like X. I also, by the way, really, really, really care about working with founders that I really admire. That was very, very important to me. And so it's like, so it's interesting. I both want control and yet I want to work with very visionary founders. Those two things do not come usually hand in hand because usually if you have control, you don't have like a super product minded founder that's like, actually, please do X, Y, and Z. So what I've actually spent my career really getting good at, and I finally like understood this myself literally through the career Odyssey and a lot of reflection, is I am incredibly good at working with product-minded founders where I can challenge their assumptions, but do it in a way that does not feel like I'm like, sorry, I just took control. Instead, it's like, this is what I really believe we should be doing. Let's partner together and like, let's debate if this is the right thing. So like having a point of view and then working with a product-oriented founder. So like understanding that about myself has helped me be like, these are the types of like problems I want to work on, the people I want to work for. And again, like Adam, like we were imploded, but again, I think like the kernel was that he was a very product oriented founder that I thought was really special. And so like just understanding that about yourself, it's not, there's no like this is one person's recipe for their career and therefore you should just do it. Like that's not how careers work. It's about understanding your zone of genius, what you really get energy from, and then figuring out a path working backwards. And so that is why, again, like why did we make this event like the Power of the Career Odyssey, as opposed to like, here's 3 frameworks for you to like advance your career? Because it all comes down to what is it that you want? What is it that gives you energy? Because if you know that, you're going to accelerate much faster than if you were just to be like, so-and-so did Y, I'm going to do it. So-and-so did Z, and I'm going to do it. Because there's going to be all these nuances that you don't understand about what it is they did or what it was they thought about that made them successful. So I know we're at time, so I'm going to end it on that. But I really think like actually going through a cohort, really thinking about that deeply and working through those nuances, that's ultimately how you find that unlock. And there's no cheat code of like, oh, these are the 5 frameworks, go do that. I gave you some of the frameworks, which is literally like, if you had to pick these and don't pick these. But that's it at the high level. It's really about doing that work on yourself, on what it is you want, and actually having that accountability. I think the last thing I'll just say is like my partner also works in tech, and the two of us having accountability with each other has been amazing. And finding that beyond my partner, because no partner wants to hear about all your woes all the time. I'm sure a lot of married people know this. Is huge. And so being able to be part of a cohort of people where you're like, I have that accountability with my group, that is also really huge. And I think PMing is really, really lonely. And I think that if you could be part of that cohort, and again, in the course, it's 50 people and we split it up. So there are cohorts of 5, like 4 to 5, like just having that cohort and being able to continue working with them to be like, this is what I'm thinking about myself. How are you thinking about it? Like that partnership is so, so important. So I could not emphasize like taking the time to do that reflection for yourself, being part of a community and having that accountability, that steady progress day over day is what's going to make the big difference over 3, 5, 7, 10 years. There's no like cheat code.